are on the record. I'm 8-Bit Esquire, your presiding officer of the court. Calling case number 23-02, the people versus the defendant, the Neo Geo AES. The defendant has been charged with being too overpriced to add to your gaming collection, and in today's proceedings we'll determine whether it's worth spending your hard-earned money on a Neo Geo or whether you're better off saving your cash and just emulating it. In order to render a verdict, we'll hear an opening statement, take direct and cross-examination, review some forensic evidence, and listen to testimony from an expert witness. Finally, after hearing all of the evidence presented, I will render my verdict as to whether the defendant is worth buying or only worth emulating. So, without further ado, let's put the Neo Geo AES on trial. If you're under the age of 35, the words Neo Geo AES probably don't mean all that much to you. You may know about the Neo Geo as an arcade platform with its big red cabinet, its multi-slot game switch, its odd 4-button control deck, and its legendary lineup of arcade games, but you probably haven't given any thought about Neo Geo as a home console, or what the words Neo Geo AES really meant to kids growing up in the early 90s. Now, if you're over the age of 35, the words Neo Geo AES has less to do with the games themselves and more to do with how you were introduced to the console to begin with. If you were like me, you met Neo Geo in a marketing blitz found in the tattered pages of monthly video game magazines, stocked from cover to cover with memorable print advertisements. The console had this kind of speakeasy vibe to it. You knew it existed, but you never actually saw one in person. I remember the first time seeing an AES in action on Nickelodeon's Nick Arcade in 1992. Contestants would always want to play Magician Lord, an AES launch title, in their video challenges part of the game. The game always looked so cool, the soundtrack sounded incredible, and the contestants always sucked at it. I mean, it's a hard game, I don't blame them. I can recall flipping through issues of GamePro and Electronic Gaming Monthly and seeing tons of these racy ads advertising this black wedged console with these huge joysticks for controllers. I remember seeing a scantily clad woman complaining that her boyfriend won't sleep with her anymore while he's thrusting his crotch to some phallic graphics on the screen. What? Or, yeah, how about this one? I must not have any testicles because I don't own a Neo Geo. Or how about this one? Another one insinuating that you have a small penis if you play Mario or Sonic instead of Neo Geo. The ad reads, and I quote, "Why tool around with limp, underpowered 16-bit systems when Neo Geo now offers the hottest, most advanced video entertainment system in the world? Does Neo Geo cost more than other video game systems? You bet. Does a Ferrari cost more than a Yugo? Does prime rib cost more than a squirrel burger? Would you rather be a cold weenie or a real hot dog?" Dick jokes! The 90s were wild, man. Buried within reviews and previews of 8 and 16-bit games came one of the most 90s in-your-face marketing campaigns ever found in the industry. And in between these ads were reviews for these obscure Neo Geo games you've never seen on retail shelves or in your local rental store. Each review glowing with either perfect or near perfect reviews. Each game was listed at well over $200 for a console that cost over $600. What was this mythical platform? Where do I even find one? And most importantly, how would I ever convince my parents to ever buy one for me? This was the first time at 8 years of age where FOMO didn't sink in. It wasn't even an option because there was no fear of missing out. You see, in order for there to be FOMO, there needs to be something with the possibility of acquisition to quote-unquote miss out on. I had succumbed to the realization that I never would have the opportunity to own a Neo Geo. This was the first time I had ever encountered true unobtanium, and Neo Geo taught me that at this tender young age that there will be many, many, many desirable things I'll see in this world that I'll just never have. And that's okay. I'll just keep playing my Super Nintendo and be happy with that. I'll just continue to fool around with my limp, underpowered 16-bit systems. But then you acquire next month's Game Pro, and you are met, once again, with yet another advertisement and another stellar review of a game you'll never get to play, just pushing the knife deeper into your heart, an ever-present reminder that you are not special, you are middle class, you are not welcome to the premier, exclusive, upper echelon of gaming that is Neo Geo.
Oh, are you still playing your Super Nintendo? You must still wear diapers. You have a Sega Genesis? Maybe stop being so poor. You have a TurboGrafx 16? You'll die a virgin. Real gamers play Neo Geo Advanced Entertainment System. Bigger, badder, better!
The Neo Geo was one of many collaborations between SNK Corporation and Alpha Denshi Corporation, later referred to as ADK. The two companies had created a number of successful arcade titles, including Time Soldiers, Sky Soldiers, Gang Wars, and Sky Adventure, all being published by SNK. These titles were developed using the SNK M68000 platform, based on the same 16-bit Motorola processor found in other arcade systems, including Sega System 16 and Capcom CPS-1 and CPS-2 arcade hardware. SNK and the SNK/ADK partnership was responsible for several arcade hits throughout the late 1980s, and as the new decade approached, the partnership set its sights on its next-generation arcade platform. The development project was led by ADK's E.G. Fukatsu, who took the existing M68000 platform and added a faster CPU, more memory, available sprite scaling, and better sound hardware. As the project neared completion in 1989, Street Fighter creator Takashi Nishiyama left Capcom to join SNK. Nishiyama proposed what would become the Neo Geo's signature feature, support for interchangeable cartridges, which would expand the amount of available data used for game development. In addition, he had the crazy idea to develop a home console version of the arcade system. In a 2012 interview, Nishiyama stated that before Neo Geo, quote, arcade operators would have to purchase a machine for each game, but Neo Geo systems used ROM cassettes, so, like with consoles, operators would purchase the hardware once and switch cheap ROM cassettes to run different games. He further elaborated on the main motivator behind this innovation, fighting piracy. The main reason I thought it was a good idea is it was very difficult to sell new arcade games in China, Central America, and South America because of piracy. By creating a hardware system with cheap software, we were able to sell a lot of games even in pirate-heavy markets. The final designs for the Neo Geo MVS and AES were finalized in December 1989, and as Nishiyama predicted, arcade owners had the ability to install up to 6 different cartridges into a single arcade cabinet, which provided operators significant savings on cost and savings on valuable floor space. The Neo Geo MVS and its home console variant, the AES, were both released in Japan on April 26, 1990. At the time, the Neo Geo was easily the most powerful home console on the market, but it was also the most powerful arcade hardware available on the market as well. Compared to the Capcom CPS-1 system, the Neo Geo had a faster CPU, a superior sound chip with nearly twice the number of audio channels, and more video RAM, capable of displaying 3 times as many sprites, 16 times as many simultaneous colors, and sprite scaling. Given the manufacturing costs of the hardware, SNK didn't believe the AES was viable as a consumer product, so instead, the AES was initially only available for lease to hotels and bars and restaurants who wanted to give their customers a portable arcade experience. However, customer feedback from patrons demonstrated that some more affluent customers were certainly willing to shell out the cash to buy a consoleized arcade system for their own homes. On July 1st, 1991, the Neo Geo AES became available to retailers in Japan and the United States. So at the time of its US launch, an AES would cost you $649, which would get you a console, 2 joystick controllers, and your choice of a pack-in game, either Baseball Stars Professional or NAM 1975. According to Naoto Abe, a programming director for SNK, quote, "It was extremely expensive for one game. The CEO at that time wanted the arcade quality, but in the comfort of your own home. This wasn't a kid's toy. It had to be really strong. It was black, so it was more premium. It has this real feel to it." End quote. According to Nobuyaki Kuroki, an SNK game designer, quote, "Of course, everyone's initial reaction was, 'Geez, that's expensive.' You know, they were really shocked, and it was just ridiculous at that time. But for some players, the hardcore gamers, when you factor in how many times you go to the arcade, how many hundreds of dollars you're actually putting in to keep playing those games, it actually made sense to buy a Neo Geo. You'd actually save money." Really? Well, that's an enticing sales pitch. Buying a Neo Geo would actually save you money. Adjusted for inflation, in 2023, the cost of an AES was nearly $1,400 US at the time of its release. So, yeah, I don't know, Kuroki, that's some pretty good spin saying you'd actually save money buying an AES, but let's be clear, there is no fiscally responsible explanation behind ever buying a Neo Geo. If the Genesis and the SNES were an Accord and a Camry, the Neo Geo was a frickin' Bugatti. It was not designed to sell units. It was designed to outcompete literally everything else on the market. And that's exactly what it did.
Systems a Neo Geo, yeah! Now, while the fun doesn't come cheap on this expensive system, I must say the thrills are there. With some game carts alone costing up to $200 a piece, you gotta expect a lot from this cash cruncher over here. But let me tell you, the Neo Geo delivers.
The Neo Geo AES was a stupid home video game console. It was just so stupid. And it was not created for the average consumer in 1991. But in 2023, you can now own the video game console of your wildest 8-year-old gaming fantasies. Let's explore what made the AES so special in direct examination. When it comes to consoles, the first thing I usually look at is its design, and the AES is certainly in the upper tier of home consoles. If the AES was an early 90s Japanese supercar, it would be an Acura NSX. Sharp angles accentuate the console's wedge design. The case is a matte black with these faux ventilation slots at the rear, not unlike the NSX's mid-chassis engine compartment. Gold-flaked letters adorn the front, letting you know the Neo Geo is really a premium item. Across the front, you have 2 controller ports for the arcade joysticks, in addition to a power switch, headphone jack, and volume slider. Around back, there's a large 8-pin DIN connector, supplying both composite video and RGB output. Last but not least is yet another innovation from the Neo Geo, a memory card slot, a first in home video games. AES players could save their progress mid-game and take their memory card to their local arcade and pick up the action right where they left off on an MVS cabinet. I doubt anyone actually used this feature 30 years ago, but it's a neat innovation nonetheless. Let's talk about the games. The cartridges were massive. Big hulking chunks of black plastic. This was no puny hue card. There were some serious megabits stored within this silicon. After inserting the AES cartridge into its wide slot, you almost felt like you were about to detonate something. Loading up a cartridge on an AES, even in 2023, feels so unlike anything else you've ever played. These behemoths came in two different styles of case. First, a more traditional soft case, frequently seen with Japanese PC games of the same era. Later, SNK would adopt a more rigid clamshell style case with a clasp at the front. What made these cases so unique was not only the incredible artwork on the covers, but how proudly these boxes advertised the unprecedented amount of memory packed into each cartridge. Earlier launch titles for the AES would sport a mere 46 megabits, while later titles had hundreds of megabits. For reference, the Sega Genesis' largest game was Super Street Fighter II at 40 megabits, and the Super Nintendo's largest game, Tales of Phantasia, was 48 megabits. These games were so large, even next-generation consoles would still struggle to play them. PlayStation ports of The King of Fighters and Metal Slug would typically be missing frames of animation to maintain a stable frame rate. Saturn ports of the same games would oftentimes require additional RAM cartridges to run the games properly. Even then, the ports weren't pixel-perfect reproductions of the Neo Geo originals. It really wasn't until the 6th generation of game consoles where you started to see accurate ports of Neo Geo games. In fact, these games would release contemporaneously on the Neo Geo AES, while also being ported and released on the Sega Dreamcast, PlayStation 2, and original Xbox shortly thereafter. Official games were still being published for the AES up until July 2004, over 13 years after the system's original release. When playing games from the Neo Geo library, it becomes readily apparent that you're playing an arcade game. Despite the massive sizes of these games, they all load instantly and effortlessly. Gameplay always felt so snappy and responsive. The sprite work in the SNK games were always so vivid and detailed, with large scaling sprites and multiple layers of parallax scrolling. And yes, the library is limited mostly to arcade fare, fighting games, shooters, puzzle games. But what the platform offers is truly some of the best 2D arcade gaming ever seen in a home console. Let's talk about the controllers. Actually, why don't we listen to the controllers? Why don't we just put on some headphones and turn up the volume a little bit? We're going to do a little on-trial ASMR here. Here we go. You know what that is? It's the sound of opulence. That's right, folks. The Neo Geo's controllers had real micro switches inside. Now, unfortunately, I do not own the original arcade joystick controller. I only have what are commonly referred to as the kidney beans, which are cheaper yet very durable arcade sticks that would come later in the AES's lifespan. SNK also released this 4-button control pad with a thumbstick bundled with the Neo Geo CD console. Some people say this is the best control pad ever made. I'm not saying it, but some people are. Yeah, why don't we just turn up the volume again and we'll just relax. Folks, I'm sorry, but that's the most satisfying thumbstick in all of gaming. I could do this all day. Yeah. Alright, this is getting awkward. Finally, let's talk about the best part of owning a Neo Geo AES.
The flex.
Ah, yes, the flex. There really is no better reason to pick up a Neo Geo AES than to brag to everyone you possibly can on social media about what a successful human being you are, because you are fortunate enough to own a coveted Neo Geo AES for yourself.
I'm playing a Neo Geo on a PVM, which means I'm better than everyone else. Yeah, pretty much.
Yes, flex away, sir. We are all so impressed by you and your Neo Geo. Please, keep it up. Please, keep posting about your valuable AES game collection. We love it. We don't think you're a massive douchebag at all. Wait a minute, is that my Twitter? Obviously, the Neo Geo AES is not only an impressive piece of hardware, but it boasts an incredible software library as well, with some of the best arcade games ever made. However, let's look at some of the negative aspects of the console in cross-examination. So while I just said the Neo Geo has an incredible software library, one of the biggest problems with the Neo Geo is actually its game library. This is an arcade system after all, and its software lineup is arcade games. You're not finding any role-playing games here. There's no strategy games, no adventure games. This is a library focused on picking up and playing a game for a short period of time. And no, it's not all just fighting games. We have some really great action platformers, some really great shooters. But yeah, they're arcade games, and they're really short. And by virtue of them being really short, they can at times be very difficult as well, with difficulty spikes coming fairly early in most of these games. Another issue with the Neo Geo is finding the right power supply for your console. If you're crazy enough to pick up an AES for yourself, I highly recommend reviewing a detailed write-up done by Firebrand X. This will help you identify which is the correct power supply to use for your specific motherboard revision of the AES. I've left a link to the guide in the description below. Honestly, Firebrand X is a hero, and you should bookmark his website. I reference his power supply guide fairly regularly, and you should as well. Follow him on Twitter, give him money, and beer, and whatever. He's awesome. Finally, let's talk about that video output. Earlier, I said the Neo Geo outputs both composite video and RGB, which is great if you want to plug your console into a CRT or an analog to digital scaler. The problem is all those damn motherboard revisions I spoke about earlier. I've never been able to independently verify this, but apparently the quality of your RGB output and composite video output will vary depending upon the serial number of your AES, which is located on the bottom of the console. As a general rule, the larger your serial number, the worse your RGB picture quality will be, while your composite video quality will be exceptional. Again, I don't know if any of this is true, as most of this information came from Neo Geo message boards, which you probably shouldn't go on Neo Geo message boards. Thankfully, if you're super paranoid about this sort of thing, you could always just modify your console with the Neo Geo RGB Bypass modification, which is a fairly simple and straightforward mod that will sharpen your video quality and remove those unsightly jail bars from the image. Unfortunately, if you want to go this route, you're going to disable your console's composite video output. RetroRGB.com has a really useful guide on the process if you're looking to do it yourself, and I'll leave a link in the description below. You know, other than that, I can't really think of anything else I dislike about the Neo Geo. Really, nothing else is out there that might dissuade you from owning one yourself. I'm just kidding, it's really fucking expensive. Let's review that in forensic evidence. Folks, it's the elephant in the room. It always has been, it always will be with the Neo Geo. This shit ain't cheap. In digging around eBay for this episode, the lowest price Neo Geo AES I could find was this example here, a Japanese AES without a bundled joystick or cables for $370. Woof. Here's another example I was able to find another Japanese AES, but this time bundled with an original joystick for $430, which $60 for one of these joysticks is actually a pretty good deal. According to pricecharting.com, a loose AES, whether it be Japanese or from the US, will cost you over $500, assuming it comes with a joystick and cables. But wait, not all hope is lost. If you recall from our last case, the real deals are found on buye.jp. Except when it comes to the Neo Geo. I struggled to find listings under $400. Look, Neo Geo is expensive. You just got to get over it. Well, the one silver lining in acquiring a Neo Geo is that the games are actually really affordable. Actually, no. They're even more expensive than the console itself. Here are a few complete games that I have for my collection. The cheapest one, Samurai Spirits, what Samurai Showdown is called in Japan, comes in at $72. But as you can see, the majority of these games come in at over $100 and $200. And I have what I would consider a, quote, budget-friendly Neo Geo collection, if there is such a thing. It's not uncommon to see many popular games for the Neo Geo sell for several thousands of dollars. One thing you could always look for are AES conversions, which are essentially PCBs from a much cheaper MVS cartridge of the same game and placed into a sacrificial AES cartridge shell. I have 2 of these conversions in my own collection, which I purchased years ago. But honestly, today, I'm not a huge fan of these conversions. I'm not a fan of ruining a perfectly good AES cartridge, having it being ruined for some knockoff conversion. Of course, you could always just go with a flash cart like the Neo SD from Terra Onion. Unfortunately, these flash carts are currently out of stock, and as of March of 2023, I have no idea when they'll be back in stock. On top of that, surprise, surprise, these aren't cheap either, at $429 at StoneAgeGamer.com. Believe it or not, there is something affordable about the Neo Geo, and that is the available modifications for the console. The RGB triple bypass I spoke about earlier will run you about $30 to $50, assuming you have to hire a professional modder to do the work for you. The second modification I would recommend is the UniBIOS installation. UniBIOS is homebrew software by developer Razula that allows you to select which version of the game you're looking to play at startup, regardless of whether you're using a US or Japanese AES. AES games included both the Eastern and Western ROM file, in addition to the AES and MVS version of the game on each cartridge. With UniBIOS, you can select whether you want to play the home version, the arcade version, and which region's version of the same game you want to play. You can also manage files on your memory card and play the music files on the cartridge in the jukebox player. A UniBIOS installation will run you about $50 to $75, as a new chip is actually being soldered onto your motherboard, and in my opinion, this is an essential modification for your console. So let's recap. If you're looking to buy an AES, be prepared to spend, on average, of about $450, and that's if you're lucky. If you're looking to modify your system for pristine RGB video output and a region-free UniBIOS install, be prepared to tack on another $80 to $125 for the modifications. In all, be prepared to spend over $500 for a modified Neo Geo. And here's the fun part, you don't even have a game to play yet. Be prepared to shell out another $100 to $200 per game, and those are the cheap ones. Of course, you could always try to locate a flash cart or an MVS to AES conversion adapter, as MVS carts are far less expensive than their AES counterparts, although they're starting to creep up there in price as well. Okay, so the price of this thing is getting crazy, so I think the only way I could ever recommend actually buying a Neo Geo is if it just ran like crap in emulation. So let's find out from an expert witness whether or not that's the case. Now, because I only play games on original hardware, I don't know much about how well the Neo Geo performs in emulation. Hashtag emulation is for quitters. As a result, I would like to call an expert witness. Calling Scarlet Sprites. Joe is the creator of the Scarlet Sprites YouTube channel, where he documents his painstakingly accurate restorations of vintage arcade cabinets in his incredible basement home arcade. Joe contributed to the development of the FPGA-based Mistercade, and also has the distinction of having a complete set of Neo Geo MVS cartridges. What a loser. The guy also named his kid Neo, for crying out loud, so he probably knows a thing or two about the Neo Geo. So, Scarlet Sprites, will you please raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Joe, please tell the jury how the Neo Geo AES performs in emulation.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I've been asked to talk a little bit about Neo Geo and emulation, and let me tell you, back in the mid-2000s, I didn't have a whole lot of options available to me. I did not own a ton of cartridges or original Neo Geo hardware, so emulation was the way to go, and I did that via MAME, and then eventually a little bit later on, Final Burn Alpha, which is today called Final Burn Neo. And I'll be honest, running MAME, the games played pretty well, and I honestly, I didn't know a whole lot better back then either, because I wasn't doing these types of comparisons. YouTube didn't have your retro RGBs calling attention to things like this. But like anything, it evolved and it got better. And MAME is really accurate today as far as Neo Geo emulation goes. Now, Final Burn Neo, it's pretty good as well. The goal of Final Burn Neo, and I think we have to be a little bit careful with this, the goal there is always stability and getting things to run well. And so sometimes you sacrifice a little bit of accuracy to make those things happen. And I'm talking about removing glitches and garbage frames and things like that. And that developer team on Final Burn Neo will go ahead and fix those things. But it's not necessarily 100% accurate in the way original hardware would have run the game. And that's not to say that Final Burn Neo isn't accurate. It's just that that's not the primary goal of that emulator. Whereas for MAME, that's always the goal, to replicate original hardware. But both are solid options. MAME used to take a little bit more horsepower to run, but at this point in 2023, most stuff, even handhelds, are going to run both of these emulators really well. And then we get to Mister, and that's the one people always want to talk to me about because, since the mid-2000s, I have accumulated a little bit of a Neo Geo collection, and so I do play a lot of these games on original hardware, whether it's the big red arcade cabinet or the JNX consoleized MVS. And so people are always asking me for comparisons between original hardware and the Mister. So when that Neo Geo core first came out for Mister, it was like anything else. It needed a little bit of work. And I think sound issues were probably the most prominent thing that people noticed. I know Puzzle Bobble was called out pretty prominently, and that's an easy game because a lot of people play that one. But for the most part, this was a pretty good core, and it continued to evolve over time. Now, I know there were also some problems because people were reporting bugs that weren't actually bugs. Metal Slug 2, you guys know there's a lot of slowdown in that game. It's not great. I think it was rushed out by SNK to try to capitalize on the success of the first one. And there's just inherently all these bugs. And eventually Metal Slug X came out to kind of fix some of that. But people were playing Metal Slug 2 and reporting that there was all these slowdown problems. But that's fine. That's the way original hardware is supposed to behave. And so Mister was just replicating that. But over time, the Neo Geo core on Mister became awesome. And personally, even as someone who has an arcade cabinet, who has the aforementioned JNX consoleized MVS, I find myself playing Neo Geo games on Mister probably more so than I do on original hardware these days. It's just far too convenient. And with the snack option on the Blister IO, I can plug in a clicky joystick and have that same feeling as though I were playing on original consoles. So if you don't want to spend thousands of dollars, you don't want to take out a home equity loan in order to purchase original Neo Geo hardware and cartridges, you really don't have to. And it pains me to say this, but in 2023, Final Burn Neo will give you a great experience. MAME's going to give you an excellent experience. And the Mister core is just awesome on Mister. I mean, I did a frame-by-frame breakdown of a couple games back when I was capturing hardware, and it is spot on as far as rendering frame by frame. It's an exceptional option. It's the way I play Neo Geo most of the time these days, and again, being able to plug in a joystick or a Neo Geo CD gamepad just kind of completes that whole experience and is, quite honestly, maybe the way to go.
Why, thank you, Scarlet Sprites. You may now leave the witness stand. The Neo Geo AES has been charged with being too overpriced to add to your gaming collection. Is it guilty or innocent of this charge? After reviewing all of the evidence, I have reached a verdict. It is this court's verdict that the Neo Geo AES is guilty. I cannot recommend buying a Neo Geo AES. Yes, if you're my age and you know how special the Neo Geo is, It was unobtanium then, and now you have an income. You could go buy one. But really, spending over $1,000 will get you the console and maybe 2 or 3 games if you're lucky, and those are the cheap games. Really, Neo Geo emulation is just too good. Whether you're playing on MAME, Final Burn Neo, or the Neo Geo core on Mister, you're going to get an accurate, enjoyable Neo Geo experience with the entire game library at a fraction of the real hardware's cost, or no cost at all. When it comes to the Neo Geo AES, just emulate it. You know, with all this talk about emulation, maybe I should sell mine. Nah. That concludes our trial today. Join us next time for case number 20-03, The People versus Michael Jackson's Moonwalker. I'm 8-Bit Esquire, and until next time, court is adjourned.
Me personally, I'm gonna go get a raise because I want a Neo Geo.